It was a quiet evening, and the little restaurant was filled with the soft hum of conversation and the clinking of cutlery. The lights were warm and cozy, casting a gentle glow over the wooden tables and chairs. Outside, the streets were busy with people rushing home, but inside, there was a sense of calm. Among the few customers sitting at different tables, there was laughter from a group of friends, the occasional murmur of a couple sharing a quiet dinner, and the faint smell of freshly baked bread wafting through the air. Through the glass door, an elderly couple slowly walked in. They moved with careful steps, leaning on each other slightly for support. The man held a worn-out cane in one hand, and the woman carried a small purse close to her chest. Their faces were kind but carried a trace of worry, the kind that comes from years of managing life's small struggles. They were not dressed in fancy clothes, just simple attire that suggested modesty and practicality. Nothing meant to draw attention. They approached the host stand, smiling politely at the young man standing there. The host returned the greeting with a small nod, trying to appear friendly. "Good evening," said the elderly man softly. His voice was calm, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure if they belonged in such a place. The woman smiled gently beside him, her hands folded in front of her. "We'd like a table for two, please," she said. Her voice was quiet but polite, carrying a warmth that immediately made the host feel at ease. The host led them to a small corner table near the window. It was one of the better spots in the restaurant, with a nice view of the street outside, where people passed by carrying umbrellas and chatting. The couple sat down carefully, adjusting themselves in the chairs as if they didn't want to make too much noise or attract attention. They opened the menus, their fingers brushing lightly over the pages. Studying the options with quiet concentration, the restaurant staff moved around them, taking orders from other tables and delivering plates with practiced skill. The couple sat in silence for a moment, simply looking at the menu. The woman's eyes occasionally flicked to the man beside her, silently communicating without words. There was a connection between them that spoke of decades spent together, sharing joys and struggles in equal measure. They were used to taking care of each other, making sure the other was comfortable, safe and happy. Finally, the man cleared his throat and said, "I think we can manage a simple meal tonight." His tone was careful, almost apologetic, as if he was aware of the world outside their table. The woman nodded, and they gestured to the waiter when he came by. "Just a small dinner for both of us, please," the man said, trying to keep his voice steady. The waiter nodded, jotting down the order in his notebook, not giving much thought to the couple. Assuming it was just another ordinary table, the food arrived slowly, each plate carefully placed in front of them. The man and woman thanked the waiter softly, their eyes briefly meeting his with polite gratitude. They began to eat quietly, savoring each bite, as if they had learned the importance of appreciating every small thing in life. Around them, other diners continued their conversations, laughter filling the gaps in the restaurant's ambient sound. But the elderly couple seemed to exist in their own small world, focused only on the moment they were sharing. As the meal continued, a subtle tension began to form, though it was invisible to most of the room. The man reached for his wallet, checking the small amount of cash he had brought. The woman did the same, carefully counting coins and bills in her purse. It was not enough to cover the meal, and for a moment a shadow of worry crossed their faces. The man looked down at his plate, trying not to show his discomfort, while the woman pressed her lips together, keeping a calm expression. Some of the staff started to notice. The young host who had seated them earlier glanced over, frowning slightly. He didn't say anything, but there was a subtle change in his expression, a hint of impatience. The waiter who had taken their order returned to the table, expecting payment. When he noticed the couple counting their money so carefully, his smile faltered. A few customers nearby began to glance at them, sensing the tension. Whispers started spreading quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. As people wondered why the couple was taking so long, the man's hands shook slightly as he tried to organize the bills. "I think we might have miscalculated," he said softly, his voice barely audible. The woman looked at him with concern. "It's all right," she whispered. "We'll figure it out." But there was a nervous edge in her tone, one that betrayed their anxiety. They were not used to asking for help, and the thought of being unable to pay for a meal was humiliating to them. The waiter returned, and the atmosphere became slightly uncomfortable. "Is there a problem with the payment?" he asked, his tone now sharper than before, hinting at irritation. The couple looked up, startled. The man stammered slightly. We might not have enough," he began, but his voice trailed off. The woman quickly tried to reassure him. "We didn't mean any trouble," she said, her hands clutching the edge of the table. At that moment, a hush seemed to settle over the room. Other diners began to notice the tension. Some glanced away, pretending not to see, while others stared, curiosity mixed with a hint of judgment. A few people whispered to each other, wondering why the elderly couple was struggling, their expressions filled with mild disapproval. The couple remained calm on the outside, but inside their hearts raced. They had never imagined their quiet dinner would become a source of attention or discomfort outside. The night continued as usual, but inside the restaurant, time seemed to slow down for them. Every movement felt heavier, every glance sharper. They didn't want anyone to think less of them, yet there was no hiding the small stack of bills and coins on the table. They tried to count carefully, their hands trembling slightly. The woman's eyes welled up, not with anger, but with the embarrassment of needing help. The man sighed softly, wishing there was a way to make things right without drawing attention, and then, quietly, almost unnoticed at first, the restaurant door opened again. A man walked in with calm confidence. He was dressed simply, blending in with the crowd, but there was a presence about him that made the air feel different. People glanced briefly, curious about the newcomer, but he didn't say much. He walked slowly toward a table in the corner, not drawing attention to himself. It would have been easy to miss him completely if one wasn't paying close attention. The elderly couple didn't notice him at first. They were too absorbed in their own struggle, their minds occupied with the fear of being judged. But the subtle change in the atmosphere was palpable. There was a sense of calm, a quiet reassurance, as if someone had entered the room who could make things better without even trying. The couple continued their attempts to count the money, still unsure how they would manage. It was a moment filled with uncertainty, yet also with the faintest hint of hope. The evening had started like any other, with the promise of a simple meal and a quiet conversation. But as they sat there, struggling with their bills and their pride, the stage was being set for something extraordinary. They did not know it yet, but their lives were about to intersect with someone who would change not just this evening, but the memory of it forever. Every glance, every whispered word, every subtle movement in the restaurant seemed amplified. The couple held their heads a little lower, trying to remain invisible, but the weight of the moment pressed down on them. Outside, life moved on, indifferent to the small drama inside, but inside, the room was alive with tension, curiosity, and the quiet beginnings of something beautiful. The elderly couple sat quietly, still struggling to count their bills. Their hands trembled slightly, not from age alone, but from the anxiety of the situation. They had never imagined that a simple dinner could become so complicated. Every coin seemed to matter, every note felt like it carried the weight of the world. The man frowned as he tried to organize the bills, muttering softly to himself, "I think this will just cover one of the meals." The woman placed her hand gently over his, a quiet attempt to soothe him. "It will be fine," she whispered. Though even she wasn't entirely convinced, the waiter returned once more, clipboard in hand, his face now tight with impatience. "Sir, ma'am, is there a problem with the payment?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough sharpness to make the couple flinch. They both looked up, meeting his gaze for a brief moment, and the man shook his head slightly. We might not have enough," he admitted quietly, lowering his eyes toward the table. His voice was soft, almost apologetic, like he was admitting to a small but serious mistake. The woman leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "We are very sorry. We did not mean to cause any trouble," she said. She tried to keep a smile on her face, but there was a hint of fear in her eyes. Around them, a few nearby diners were starting to notice. Whispers floated through the room, quiet at first but growing as curiosity took hold. Some diners glanced at their own meals, awkwardly unsure if they should look or not. Others simply stared, their expressions a mix of curiosity and judgment. The tension in the room grew heavier, like an invisible weight pressing down on everyone. The elderly couple felt every glance and every whisper, even if the words weren't meant to reach them. They were polite, careful, and humble, but the situation made them feel exposed. The woman's hands shook slightly as she adjusted her purse, trying to keep herself composed. The man shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller. Invisible. It was in that tense moment that the man in the corner, the newcomer who had entered, quietly looked up. His eyes scanned the room, calm and observant. He noticed the elderly couple immediately, sensing the discomfort and worry etched on their faces. He saw how they counted their money with care, how the man's fingers trembled as he tried to organize the bills, and how the woman's eyes flicked nervously toward the waiter. There was no hesitation in his gaze, no judgment, just a quiet understanding. Without making a scene, he called over a server who was passing by. "Excuse me," he said gently, his voice calm and low so that only the server could hear. "Can you tell me what's happening at that table?" He gestured subtly toward the elderly couple. The server looked surprised, glancing nervously at the table before speaking. It seems the couple might not have enough to pay for their meal," he admitted, shrugging. "They're counting their money, but it looks like they're short." The man nodded, not saying much else. He thanked the server quietly and waited a moment, his expression calm, almost contemplative. Meanwhile, the elderly couple continued to fumble with their bills, unaware that someone had taken notice. The tension around them was growing, and the waiter's patience was thinning. He returned to the table, his voice sharper this time. "Sir, ma'am, I need to know if you can pay," he said. There was an edge of frustration in his tone, and it made the couple flinch. The man swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he organized the bills once more. I think we might be a few dollars short," he admitted quietly. His voice was almost swallowed by the murmurs of the restaurant, but those nearby could hear enough to sense the embarrassment. The woman leaned closer, resting her hand lightly on his arm. "It's okay," she whispered, though her eyes betrayed worry. She felt the weight of the situation pressing down, making their small problem feel enormous. Across the room, the newcomer watched silently. He didn't make a scene, didn't call attention to himself, but there was a sense of calm authority about him. His presence alone seemed to change the energy in the room. The murmurs of other diners slowed as they noticed him observing quietly. There was no intimidation, no arrogance, just a quiet awareness that something was about to happen. The elderly couple continued their struggle, their faces a mixture of shame and helplessness. They didn't want to trouble anyone, didn't want to cause embarrassment, but the reality was unavoidable. Each coin counted seemed insufficient, each bill seemed too small. The man sighed softly, leaning back in his chair for a moment, trying to gather his thoughts. The woman adjusted her purse again, her eyes downcast, wishing she could disappear. Then the waiter approached once more, his frustration now fully visible. "I need to know if you can pay," he repeated, a bit louder this time. The elderly couple looked at each other, unsure what to do. Their faces were pale, not from illness, but from the stress of the moment. It was not a matter of pride alone, they simply didn't have enough. The man's hand hovered over the pile of bills, shaking slightly, and the woman tried to steady it with a gentle touch. The murmurs in the room grew a little louder as other diners began to notice the scene more clearly. Some people exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. A few whispered quietly to each other, speculating about the couple's situation. The elderly pair felt the weight of every gaze, every judgment, every small reaction from those around them. At that moment, the newcomer, calm and composed, decided it was time to act. He stood up slowly, walking with measured steps toward the elderly couple. There was nothing showy in his movement, no rush, no flourish, just a quiet determination. The couple barely noticed him at first, still absorbed in counting their money and trying to figure out how to handle the situation. But as he drew closer, there was a subtle shift in the room. People started to notice him now. Some glanced curiously, whispering to each other, wondering who he was and why he seemed so composed amidst the tension. Others simply watched silently, sensing that something important was about to happen. The newcomer reached the table and leaned in slightly, speaking in a gentle voice. "Hello," he said kindly. "I couldn't help but notice that you might be having a little trouble. Would you mind if I helped?" The elderly couple looked up, startled. Their eyes widened in surprise, and the woman's hand flew to her chest. "Oh, no, we can manage," the man said quickly, shaking his head. He didn't want to cause trouble, didn't want to accept help, but there was something in the stranger's calm demeanor, in the quiet confidence in his voice, that made them pause. The newcomer smiled gently, not pressing but making it clear that his offer was sincere. "It's no trouble at all," he said. "Please let me take care of this." The couple exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. They had never experienced such kindness from a stranger, especially at a moment that felt so humiliating. The woman's eyes welled up slightly, and the man's hands trembled a little less as he realized that someone truly cared. As he reached for his wallet, the waiter and a few nearby diners looked on, surprised. The air in the restaurant felt different now, lighter, warmer. There was no judgment, no impatience, only a quiet understanding that something kind and unexpected was happening. The elderly couple remained seated, unsure how to react, but slowly began to relax as the tension around them began to fade. The newcomer paid for the meal quietly, handing the card to the waiter with a calm smile. "It's all taken care of," he said softly, ensuring the elderly couple could hear. The woman's mouth opened slightly, unable to find words. Tears welled up in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief and gratitude she felt. The man's shoulders relaxed, a small smile breaking through the stress of the evening around them. Other diners began to notice the change. Whispers turned to smiles, and the awkward tension in the room dissipated. People returned to their meals, but with a different sense of warmth and hope. The elderly couple looked at each other, astonished, and finally allowed themselves a small laugh. Shaking their heads at the kindness they had just received, it was a quiet moment, but it carried a powerful message, even in a world where judgment and impatience can feel overwhelming. A simple act of kindness can restore dignity, calm fears, and change the energy of an entire room. The elderly couple finished their meal with lighter hearts, feeling not just relieved but also profoundly grateful for the unexpected compassion shown to them. The moment passed, but the warmth lingered in the restaurant. The elderly couple sat quietly, their hands resting on the table, still processing what had just happened. They could barely believe the kindness they had received. Their eyes met the stranger's across the table, and there was a silent understanding, a gratitude that words could not fully capture. The man's fingers traced the edge of the table nervously, while the woman wiped a small tear from her eye. Her voice caught in her throat as she tried to speak. Around them, life in the restaurant seemed to slow down, as if everyone had been reminded of something important. Other diners glanced discreetly at the scene, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others smiling softly. The waiter, who had moments ago been tense and impatient, now looked ashamed of his earlier attitude. He busied himself with other tables, trying to pretend nothing had happened, but his eyes kept flicking back to the elderly couple. The stranger, whose presence had completely changed the mood, sat down in his own corner quietly, watching the couple with a gentle smile. He did not interrupt, did not make them feel awkward or obligated. There was no grand gesture, no attention-seeking behavior, only a calm presence that made the elderly couple feel safe. The man finally found the courage to speak, his voice low but steady. "Thank you," he said softly, his eyes meeting the stranger's. We didn't expect." He trailed off, unsure how to put his feelings into words. The woman nodded beside him, her hands folded in her lap. "We've never experienced something like this," she said. It's more than we could have imagined." The stranger nodded slightly, his expression kind and unassuming. "You don't need to thank me," he said gently. "It was a small thing. I just wanted to help." His voice was calm, sincere, and carried a warmth that seemed to fill the room. It was not the voice of someone seeking recognition, but of someone who genuinely cared about another human being. The elderly couple sat back, taking a deep breath. They felt a weight lift off their shoulders, a tension that had been building throughout the meal slowly dissolving. They looked around the room and noticed the other diners again, realizing that everyone had witnessed the act of kindness. Some people smiled at them, while others simply nodded silently. As if acknowledging the humanity of the moment, the man turned slightly to the stranger, curiosity mixing with gratitude. You didn't even know us," he said. "Why would you do this for us?" The stranger smiled softly, leaning back in his chair. "Because everyone deserves a little help sometimes," he replied simply. "It doesn't matter if I know you or not. We all have moments when we need a hand, and it felt like this was one of yours." The woman's eyes glistened as she nodded. "You're very kind," she whispered. "We didn't know what to do, and you made everything okay." Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear or sadness, but from relief and gratitude. She had spent her whole life trying to manage on a limited budget, always careful not to ask for help, always trying to stay independent. But in that moment, she realized that accepting kindness was not weakness, it was human. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the restaurant continued to shift. The tension that had been present earlier was gone, replaced by a quiet warmth that seemed to touch every table. The waiter moved past the couple again, offering a small, apologetic smile. I'm sorry for earlier," he said softly. The couple shook their heads. "It's all right," the man replied. "We understand." The waiter nodded, relieved, and continued with his work. His earlier impatience replaced with a newfound respect. The stranger watched quietly, observing the subtle interactions. He noticed the way the couple relaxed slightly, how their shoulders dropped, and how their hands, once tense, now rested gently on the table. The woman finally laughed softly, a sound full of relief and surprise. The man chuckled alongside her, shaking his head in disbelief. "I never thought dinner could feel like this," he said, still smiling. At that moment, the waiter returned with a small dessert that the couple had not ordered. The stranger had quietly arranged for them to have a treat, knowing that sometimes small joys could make a big difference. The woman looked at the dessert, eyes wide. "You didn't have to," she said softly, a smile spreading across her face. The man nodded, equally amazed. "We can't accept this," he said, though his voice lacked the firmness it had before. The stranger shook his head gently. "Please," he said. "It's nothing. Just enjoy it. That's all that matters." His words were simple, but they carried a deep sincerity. It was clear that he had no desire for recognition or praise. He simply wanted the couple to feel cared for, to enjoy a moment without worry. The couple hesitated for a moment, then slowly began to eat the dessert, savoring each bite with quiet appreciation. Around the room, other diners began to notice small acts of change. Some whispered quietly to each other, talking about what had just happened. Others smiled, inspired by the simplicity of the gesture. The restaurant felt lighter, warmer, almost as if the air itself had shifted. Even the staff, who had been tense and impatient, now moved with more care and gentleness, perhaps learning something about patience and humanity. From the stranger's quiet example, the elderly couple began to speak softly to each other, their voices low but full of warmth. "I can't believe someone would do this," the woman said. "It feels wonderful." The man nodded, his eyes misty. "Yes. It's been a long time since we felt this way," he replied. "Someone actually cared about us. Just because we're people." They held hands briefly across the table, a small gesture that spoke volumes about relief, gratitude, and shared understanding. The stranger remained in his corner, observing without intruding. He noticed the little things, the way the couple's laughter had returned, the way their posture was no longer tense, the way their eyes sparkled with renewed hope. It was not a moment of grand gestures or speeches, but a quiet, human moment that carried tremendous weight. The elderly couple felt seen, respected, and understood, and that alone was enough to change the evening completely. As the meal drew to a close, the man and woman prepared to leave. They looked at the stranger one last time, wanting to say more but finding that words were not enough. Their gratitude was not just for the meal, it was for the restoration of dignity, for the reminder that even in a world that can sometimes feel harsh, there are people willing to show compassion without expecting anything in return. The stranger smiled at them one last time. "Take care," he said gently. "And remember, a little kindness goes a long way. Pass it on when you can." The couple nodded, touched by the simplicity and truth in his words. They gathered their belongings slowly, not wanting the moment to end, and made their way to the door, stepping out into the night with lighter hearts. Outside, the streets were busy as before, but the elderly couple moved differently now. There was a subtle spring in their step, a sense of hope they had not felt in a long time. They held hands tightly, savoring the warmth of the experience, knowing that something extraordinary had happened in the quiet corner of a small restaurant. Back inside, the restaurant continued its evening, but the atmosphere had changed. Staff moved with renewed patience, diners smiled more easily, and the memory of the stranger's quiet act of kindness lingered in the air. It was a simple moment, yet it had the power to inspire, reminding everyone present that human compassion, small as it may seem, can leave a lasting mark on the world. The elderly couple would remember that night forever, not just for the meal or the dessert, but for the reassurance that someone had cared enough to act, without seeking recognition or reward. It was a reminder that kindness is never wasted, and that even the smallest gesture can change lives, one quiet act at a time. The restaurant had quieted down for a moment, the gentle hum of conversation returning after the brief tension. The elderly couple sat at their table, trying to finish the small dessert they had been offered. Their hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, fingers brushing occasionally in quiet comfort. Each bite of the dessert brought a small, almost childlike smile to their faces, a reminder that even small joys could lift heavy hearts. Yet, despite the calm, there was still a lingering worry in their eyes. They could not completely shake the feeling that they were being watched, that someone else might judge them for the difficulty they had faced. It was then that the stranger, whose quiet presence had already changed the mood of the room, decided to take a gentle step closer. He moved slowly and carefully, without creating a scene or drawing unnecessary attention. His calm confidence made his presence noticeable, but not intrusive. He leaned slightly toward the elderly couple, a soft smile on his face. "I hope you are enjoying the dessert," he said kindly. His voice was quiet yet carried warmth, the kind of voice that made people feel safe, understood, and cared for without needing to explain themselves. The elderly woman looked up, blinking as if the moment itself were surreal. "It's wonderful," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. I don't even know how to thank you." The man beside her nodded in agreement, his hands still clutching the edge of the table. "Yes," he added quietly. "This is more than we could have ever imagined. You've made tonight special." The stranger shook his head gently, keeping his tone calm and humble. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "It's not about that. It's about helping when it's needed. Sometimes a little kindness can make a big difference." His words were simple, yet they carried an incredible depth, and the couple could feel the sincerity behind them. They realized that this was not about showing off or impressing anyone. It was about an authentic act of care, something rare and beautiful in the world. The elderly man hesitated for a moment, then asked cautiously, You don't even know us. Why would you do this?" The stranger smiled softly, his eyes gentle. "Because everyone deserves a hand when they need it," he replied simply. "It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. Life is sometimes difficult, and a little help can go a long way. You are not alone." The woman felt a lump in her throat. Her life had been one of quiet struggles, years of managing limited resources, making small sacrifices, and trying not to ask for help. She had learned to be independent, to keep her pride intact, but tonight she realized that accepting help did not mean losing dignity. On the contrary, it reminded her of the humanity in people, the goodness that still existed even in moments of discomfort. Around them, other diners had started to notice the interaction. Some watched quietly, a few whispering to each other in admiration. The tension that had once filled the room had completely lifted, replaced by a sense of warmth and calm. Even the staff seemed different now, less hurried, less impatient, more mindful of their actions. The atmosphere of the restaurant had changed entirely. And it was all because of the quiet presence of one person who had decided to act with compassion. The elderly couple continued to eat slowly, savoring each bite, but they could not help glancing at the stranger from time to time. There was a subtle curiosity in their eyes, mixed with gratitude. They had been struggling for so long, and yet here was someone who saw their humanity without judgment, without expectation. It was an experience that touched them deeply, one they knew would remain in their hearts forever. The stranger decided to make one more gentle gesture. He called a server over discreetly and asked for something small, a token of thoughtfulness, not extravagance. When the server returned, he brought a small handwritten note along with a warm beverage for the couple. The note simply said, "You are valued. You are not alone." The woman's hands trembled as she picked it up, reading the words carefully, her eyes filling with tears. The man looked at her, silently sharing the emotions that were too big for words. You didn't have to," the woman whispered, her voice breaking slightly. The stranger smiled and shook his head. "It's no trouble," he said softly. "Just remember that a little kindness goes a long way. Treat others with the same care, and the world becomes a little brighter." His tone was gentle, not preachy, but it carried a powerful lesson, one that the elderly couple would remember for the rest of their lives. The waiter, who had been tense and impatient only moments ago, now approached with an apologetic look. I am sorry for earlier," he said quietly. The elderly couple shook their heads. "It's okay," the man said softly. "We understand." The waiter smiled faintly and moved on, clearly changed by witnessing the kindness and seeing how it had affected not just the couple, but the entire atmosphere in the restaurant. The stranger remained seated in his corner, observing quietly but purposefully. He noticed the small changes, the way the couple's posture had relaxed, the soft smiles returning to their faces, the light in their eyes that had been missing for hours. There was no need for words, no need for attention. The act itself spoke volumes, and everyone in the room could feel its impact. The couple began to talk softly to each other, their voices low but full of warmth. "I can't believe someone would do this for us," the woman said, her hand resting lightly on the man's arm. "It feels wonderful." The man nodded, his eyes still misty. "Yes, it's been a long time since we felt this way," he replied. "Someone actually cared for us. Just because we are people." They held hands briefly. A quiet gesture that expressed more than words ever could, a mix of relief, gratitude, and awe at the unexpected kindness they had received. The stranger decided it was time to leave them to their moment, to let them enjoy the calm and peace they deserved. He stood quietly, moving with careful, measured steps. Before he left, he gave a small wave, a gentle acknowledgement of the couple's presence and of the bond formed in the brief but meaningful interaction. "Take care," he said softly. "Remember, kindness can be passed on in small ways. Share it whenever you can." The elderly couple watched him go, their hearts full. They did not know his name, they did not need to. The impact of his actions was clear and lasting. He had shown them that even in moments of fear, embarrassment, or difficulty, there were still people willing to act with compassion and humanity. It was a lesson they would carry with them forever, a reminder that kindness does not need grandeur. It only needs a willing heart. As the stranger exited the restaurant, a sense of calm and hope lingered in the air. The other diners returned to their meals, but many of them carried with them the memory of the quiet, unassuming act they had witnessed. Some would go home that night and think about it for days, inspired to act more kindly themselves. The staff, too, moved with renewed care and patience. Having seen the power of empathy in action, the elderly couple finally finished their meal, their hearts lighter and their spirits lifted. They gathered their belongings slowly, savoring the last moments of the evening. As they stepped outside into the night, the cool air felt refreshing, almost symbolic of the new energy in their hearts. They held hands tightly, savoring the warmth and hope that had been restored. Knowing that this night would remain in their memories forever, the restaurant now returned to its usual rhythm, carried with it the quiet echo of a lesson that had been shared without words, that true kindness can change lives, that compassion can restore dignity, and that small actions can ripple out to touch more people than one might ever know. The elderly couple walked home slowly, smiling and speaking softly to each other, replaying the events of the evening. They could not stop marveling at the simple yet profound act of care they had received. It had turned a moment of embarrassment into one of deep human connection, reminding them that even in a world that can sometimes feel harsh, there is always room for kindness. The elderly couple walked slowly down the quiet street, their hands intertwined. The night was cool, with a gentle breeze brushing their faces, and the city lights reflected softly on the wet pavement from a recent rain. Each step they took felt lighter than before, almost as if the burden of the evening had been lifted from their shoulders. Their hearts were full, their minds replaying the events of the restaurant with amazement and gratitude. What had started as a simple dinner had become a moment of kindness that they would never forget. The woman glanced at her husband, a small smile playing on her lips. "I still can't believe it," she whispered. "Someone we didn't even know? Someone just decided to help us out of kindness. It feels unreal." Her voice trembled slightly, not with fear or sadness, but with the profound emotions of relief and wonder. The man nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights. "Yes," he said. "It's a reminder that people like him exist. People who act without expecting anything in return. It makes the world feel better somehow." They continued walking in silence for a moment, letting the calm of the night sink in. The elderly couple had lived through many hardships, both small and large, over the years. They had learned to manage on little, to save and plan, to be careful with every expense. But tonight was different. Tonight they had been reminded that kindness is not measured by wealth, status, or appearances. It comes from the heart, and it can change lives in ways no one can anticipate. Back at the restaurant, life had resumed its normal rhythm, but the energy had changed. The staff, who had been tense and rushed earlier, now moved with more patience and care. They noticed the subtle shifts, the warmth that lingered, the calm smiles on the faces of diners, and the lightness in the air that had been missing before. The act of kindness had not only affected the couple, but had created ripples that touched everyone in the room. Some diners, inspired by what they had witnessed, made small gestures of their own, leaving an extra tip, helping a friend with their meal, or simply offering a kind word to someone nearby. The elderly couple paused at a small intersection, catching their breath. The man looked down at his wife's hand in his, feeling a sense of peace that he had not experienced in a long time. I think this is something we should remember," he said softly. "Not just tonight, but always. To remember that helping others, even in small ways, can make a difference?" The woman nodded, squeezing his hand gently. "Yes," she replied, "and we should pass it on whenever we can." Just like he did. They began walking again, moving slowly toward home. Their conversation was soft and reflective, filled with observations about the evening and the stranger's gentle demeanor. "He didn't want to be noticed," the woman said. "He didn't want anyone to feel obligated or embarrassed. He just helped, simply because it was the right thing to do." The man nodded. "Exactly," he said. "There's so much we can learn from people like him. Not for attention, not for praise, just for the sake of kindness." Meanwhile, the memory of the stranger lingered in their minds. His calm, unassuming presence had turned a difficult situation into a moment of hope. They remembered how he had spoken gently, how he had observed without judgment, and how he had acted with sincerity. It was rare to encounter someone who could inspire such deep emotions without any grandeur or showiness. He had reminded them of the simple beauty of humanity, of the power of compassion, and of the importance of looking out for one another. The couple reached the front of their home, pausing at the small gate. They looked at each other, their eyes reflecting the emotions of the evening. "I feel lighter," the woman said softly. Not just about the meal, but about life in general. Tonight reminded me that there's still goodness in people, still hope, still love that can be shown without asking for anything in return. The man nodded, a smile spreading across his face. Yes, he said. It's a rare gift, and we were lucky to witness it. We should carry this with us always. As they stepped inside their home, the warmth of the living room embraced them. The lights were soft, and the quiet hum of the heater created a cozy atmosphere. The couple sat down together, holding hands and reflecting on the evening. I feel like we've been given more than just a free meal, the woman said. We've been reminded of what it means to be human, to care for others, and to act with kindness without expecting anything back. The man nodded, his eyes thoughtful. Yes, it's something we can remember and share. Every day, in little ways, we can try to do the same. They spent the next few minutes in silence, thinking about the stranger and the subtle ways he had transformed their night. They realized that his actions had done more than help them financially. They had restored their faith in people, lifted their spirits, and given them a story they would cherish forever. They knew that such moments were rare, but they also knew that the lesson they had learned was timeless. Outside, the city continued its steady rhythm. People walked past, wrapped in their own lives, unaware of the quiet drama that had unfolded in the little restaurant hours earlier. But the ripple of kindness had already begun. Some of the diners who had witnessed the event left the restaurant thinking differently about how they could treat others. The staff carried the memory with them, inspired to approach their work with more patience and understanding. And the elderly couple most importantly carried it in their hearts. A beacon of hope and a reminder that one simple act could touch countless lives. The couple sat together, reminiscing quietly about the meal, the dessert, the small note, and the stranger's words. Do you think we'll ever see him again? The woman asked softly. The man shook his head gently. I don't know, he said. But it doesn't matter. What matters is what he taught us, the lesson of kindness, of seeing others without judgment, of acting when we can. That's something we can carry with us every day. They looked at each other and smiled, a sense of peace and contentment settling over them. They felt stronger, more hopeful, and more connected to the world around them. The evening had begun with uncertainty and worry, but ended with inspiration and warmth. They realized that moments of difficulty could be transformed into moments of joy and human connection, sometimes in ways they never expected before going to bed. The couple placed the small note from the stranger on the table by the window, where the soft light from outside could illuminate it. They wanted to see it in the morning, a gentle reminder of what had happened and a symbol of the kindness that existed in the world. We should remember this, the man said. Every day we should try to pass it on, even in small ways. The woman nodded, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude. Yes, she whispered. It's the kind of memory we'll keep forever. As the night deepened, they prepared for sleep, their hearts full. The worry and tension that had weighed heavily on them earlier had vanished, replaced by warmth, hope, and a renewed belief in humanity. They knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but the memory of this evening would remain a source of comfort and inspiration. They had been reminded that even strangers could make a difference, that compassion and empathy were powerful tools, and that the smallest acts of kindness could leave lasting impressions. Outside, the quiet city night went on, indifferent yet somehow touched by the events that had occurred in a small restaurant. Inside, the elderly couple slept peacefully, their dreams filled with hope and light. The lessons of the evening, the generosity, the calm presence, the gentle words, and the unassuming act of kindness had been etched deeply into their hearts. They knew they would carry it with them always, sharing it in thought, word, and deed whenever possible. The story of that evening, though small and seemingly ordinary, was extraordinary in its impact. A simple dinner had transformed into a moment of human connection and compassion that would stay with the couple forever. They had been reminded that kindness is never wasted, that a single thoughtful act can ripple out in ways we may never see, and that humanity is defined not by wealth, fame, or status, but by the choices we make to help one another. As dawn approached, the couple awoke with a renewed sense of purpose and gratitude. The night had shown them the power of quiet generosity and the beauty of selfless acts. They knew that even when life seemed difficult, there were people willing to make the world brighter through small, thoughtful actions. And in their hearts they carried a promise to honor that kindness, to remember it always, and to continue the ripple of compassion wherever they could. The evening that began with struggle had ended with hope, warmth, and a reminder that the world still holds goodness. Sometimes in the most unexpected places, the elderly couple would never forget the quiet stranger who had changed their night. And through their gratitude, the lesson of kindness would continue to spread, one heart at a time.